know why the editorial meetings at Ms. Magazine were the best. I mean, life to me is anyway one big editorial meeting. And Ms. Magazine was a mentoring machine in a lot of ways. We were mentoring each other. We discovered one day that we were extremely tired. Why was that? And we counted the numbers of first-time authors we had published. When most magazines had a stable of 5 or 6 stars, we had published what? Suzanne Braun-Levine is here, who was our editor. Hundreds, like 400 or something. And we thought, no wonder we're exhausted. And Joanne Edgar, where are you? Another of our founding editors. So, you know, I could have had no more fun on earth than we did at Ms. Magazine. And I could have no award that is more than tonight. I mean, this is my favorite kind of evening. First of all, I'm with writers, other crazy people. That probably means each of you and I are all feeling guilty right now that we should be writing, right? Secondly, it's a revolution you can dance to, as Emma Goldman said. That is the best song I have ever heard. Don't you think that's going to be a huge hit? We have to get it out there. We have to get everybody on earth. It is absolutely great. And so here I am, a happy, completely happy person, an 80-year-old woman in a motorcycle belt. I just bought this. I'm not kidding. It was a motorcycle shop on Lexington Avenue last week. I absolutely couldn't resist it. And everything about this evening, each of you here is a huge award. I realize that narrative is maybe the most important thing on earth, you know, because it's how we understand each other. Otherwise, we can't empathize. It happens that our brains are organized on narrative because we've been sitting around campfires for 100,000 years telling stories. That's how we shared maps and shared advice and shared medical advice. We have to have narrative. And yet a lot of the current media believe that narrative is soft news and only facts and generalities, hard news, are serious. Gendered one more time, right? So I think actually we in this country and many others, because this country dominates the kind of media we get and the news we hear, are starved for narrative. And it's why we find ourselves attracted to celebrity stories. It's the only narrative in town. And it used to be, before the advent of the telegraph machine, that everything was narrative. That was the way news was told. The obligation of the writer, journalist as well, was to put the reader in the place where the journalist was so that they could have the same experience. And you were responsible for the accuracy of the facts, but you put them in a narrative form so the reader could understand, and that has gone. It went with the telegraph machine, which then invented who, what, where, why, when, you know, stories you could cut off from the bottom, the inverted pyramid, all of that stuff. Now, and there's nothing sacred about that, and it's still being taught in journalism schools, I'm sorry to say. Yet now we have simultaneous transmission, so we can tell stories again. And you are nurturing the future storytellers, the present storytellers. You are allowing this kind of self-expression. I'm sure that most of us here who are too old to be mentees devoutly wish we could have had this organization in our lives, no? I mean, the only writer, the only woman writer I really knew was Louisa May Alcott. And, you know, I fantasized that she would come back to life and that I would, really, that I would be able to talk to her. I endlessly fantasized, you know, what would I show her that was different now from when she lived? I mean, this was like a running daydream. And that was it. I mean, that was my only idea that a female human being could be a writer. I remember writing a poem once when I was briefly, I say briefly because I didn't go to school that much until I was sort of 11 or 12, which explains why I can't make change or understand. But anyway, or I don't know where, I don't know anything about geography, but I wrote a very serious poem about Thanksgiving. And the teacher thought that I must have copied it from someone else because it was too grown up. And that was so discouraging to me, just that little thing, that she thought that I was not being honest, that it wasn't really mine, that it just you know, made me feel bad about writing for, I mean, I know it's irrational, but there it was. And there was just no encouragement that I was aware of. So, you know, you are doing the most important thing that I can imagine. You are helping female human beings, the most absent from the dialogue, the multi-log as it should be, not a dialogue, right? To tell our stories, to tell their stories, to help all of us learn. And we should remember that there is, I mean, the reason it's hard for young women to have a voice and to speak is because it's dangerous. It's dangerous for female human beings to be able to have a voice and tell their own stories. Malala is an example. The women in Nigeria are an example. The man in Santa Barbara told us why, right? It's all about, at the bottom, at the root, it's all about reproduction. Women's bodies are the means of reproduction. And owning our voices, owning our minds, means owning, I mean, we're seizing control of the means of reproduction. It even sounds serious, doesn't it? Right. We need to remember how deep it goes. We study about production. We don't study about the importance of reproduction. We don't study how important it is, vital to the maintenance of class and race and ethnicity and everything else. You can't maintain racial separation or ethnic or caste or whatever the form of hierarchy it is without controlling reproduction and controlling who has children with whom and who owns those children. It is absolutely fundamental. And the guy in Santa Barbara said it. You know, he just said feminism is evil because it allows women to control reproduction. It's kind of breathtaking when you hear it coming from the adversary. And I think sometimes our adversaries know it better than we do. It's why our revolutions, our movements are all one movement. Sometimes when I'm on campus, which I am a lot, kids will say to me, why is it that the same groups are against lesbians and birth control? This strikes them as odd. And I have to say, well, it's because these groups are against any form of sexual expression that cannot end in reproduction and in which the kids are not properly patriarchally owned. It just is, right? And it's why you know, if you can't maintain racism without controlling, I mean, there it is. And by allowing and encouraging and inspiring young women to tell their stories, you are freeing the heart and the mind and the body and performing a truly revolutionary act. The those terrorists in Nigeria could quite logically have kidnapped very important people, decision-making people, people in government, people in business, and demanded ransom. But who did they kidnap? No, they kidnapped young women. Because that is the, you know, these are, because all these authoritarian, fascist, racist groups can do everything but reproduce. It's the one thing they can't do. And therefore, they are in backlash against our worldwide efforts to just simply say, with sweet reason, we are going to decide for ourselves. We are going to have the freedom of our own voices and our own bodies. So there is no more revolutionary thing that you could do. And, you know, it's why this group has grown so fast, right? You've allowed young women to have a voice. You've encouraged them to have a voice. And I think that voice is that individual, unique voice that is completely unique on the one hand and is balanced on the other hand by being part of the human community. We are all two things. We are unique. Each of us is some combination of millennia of heredity and environment that could never have happened again in quite the same way, and will never happen again in quite the same way. And that's the voice we write from. That's the individuality that's inside us. And we are equally part of the human community. We are both of those things. Robin Morgan has a wonderful phrase, which is, hate generalizes, love specifies. And you, by your encouragement, are allowing the individual specific voice to come forward and do away with the group judgments and do away with the hierarchy and do away with the idea that half the human race should be controlled by the other half. You know, there is a wonderful book now by a woman named Valerie Hudson, who's writing, we should all keep track of, called Sex and World Peace. And she and other scholars, but it's a readable book, I have to say. It's not just, right. She and other scholars have demonstrated that the most reliable indicator of whether there will be violence inside a country or whether a country will be willing to use military violence against another country is actually not poverty, it's not access to natural resources, it's not religion, it's not even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. Not because female life is any more important than male life, but because it is about reproduction, and consequently it's what we see first. We see it in the family, we see it in our neighborhoods, we see it, in this country, more women are murdered by their husbands and boyfriends than people were killed since 9/11, than people were killed in 9/11 in Iraq and in Afghanistan, collectively. More women have been killed by their husbands and boyfriends. And with the son preference and daughter deficit, as we know, as all the kinds of the ways in which the population is very skewed throughout Asia and other parts of the world, violence in conflict zones, everything has ended now. It hasn't ended, but has brought us to a place where for the first time in human history, there are fewer females on Earth than males. We don't know that that's ever happened before. And a lot of it is backlash against women who were taking control of themselves and their hearts and minds and wombs, and therefore becoming a threat. So, I don't know how to say this to you, but I think you're on the front lines. And I think it's quite subversive to help women take control of their brains, because the wombs can't be far behind. And you don't get quite as much opposition with the brain thing, right? So I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because together we're going to lead toward what once existed, I think, before patriarchy, racism, nationalism, monotheism, and other bullshit, which is a world in which we are linked and not ranked. And we'll get there.